Hey 12s, welcome in. Today I'm talking about the Seahawks' new coaching staff. I'm really excited for how young these guys are. They bring a lot to the table. And so I just wanted to talk about what their strengths are going to be and how they're going to fit in Seattle. Only Carl Scott is the only coach that is staying. So this really is a completely new group of guys. And I'm really interested to see, the potential upside of bringing in such a young group. So let's jump in. We're going to start here, obviously, with Mike Macdonald. Mike Macdonald was my number one head coaching candidate. This is because I really love his scheme. I love the way that his players play for him. That Ravens defense was fast. That Ravens defense, they reminded me of the Legion of Boom, of these all-time great defenses where everyone is just flying around and doing their job, and they're just really fundamentally sound. And I think that goes back to the job that Mike Macdonald does with them. He promises to fix this defense. And if you would have asked me what the Seahawks' biggest weakness was in 2023, it was that defense. Lots of different metrics would have the Seahawks offense ranked in that 10 to 15 range. And I know that the offense had their own problems, but our defense was bottom 5, no matter what metric you would look at. And the talent doesn't match that. You have a Hall of Fame caliber linebacker in Bobby Wagner. Obviously he's at the tail end of his career, but still a good player. You have one of the most exciting young players in Devin Witherspoon. Your secondary is pretty good. Tariq Woolen, guys like Trey Brown, backing him up. Trey Brown is a great number 3 corner. Defensive line, especially once we got Leonard Williams, that defensive line is average at worst, but I think pretty good. Leonard Williams, Draymond Jones, Boye Mafe really came on. I just think that this team was far too talented to be that bad. This was not a bottom 5 roster on the defense. I would say this was an above average one, or maybe average. There were definitely some weaknesses, but regardless, I think that Mike Macdonald can really take this defense and make it a top 10 unit year one. And that was why I loved him so much as a hire. I think he's going to bring that mentality that the Seahawks have been missing. And I think he's going to revitalize this defense. And he also looks to be the right leader, the right man for this job, and the leader that is going to continue on this Pete Carroll legacy, sure, but also build upon it and really make it his own. This is not an easy job. I wouldn't say that this is, it's not a clean slate. And yes, there's a little bit of, messiness, if you want to call it, with how Pete Carroll went out. And that whole situation and the fact that you're kind of sticking with the general manager from Pete Carroll. But I think he's going to do a great job. I think he is the right guy. He reminds me a lot of, he agrees with Pete Carroll. He reminds me a lot of Pete Carroll in some ways. He's obviously different, and he's definitely a different guy. But I really do like everything that Mike Macdonald brings. And I think he really is the perfect guy for this job. I'm so impressed with the Seahawks it seems like this was the guy that they wanted. They waited around and then got him as quickly as they could. And he's just the right guy for the job. I was thrilled when I heard the news. This is going to be a really good head coach hire. And I think he gives us the best chance to win year one. But let's move on to Ryan Grubb, the offensive coordinator that Mike Macdonald hired. And apparently they had a pretty sound relationship prior to this head coaching coordinator searches. And so Ryan Grubb, he was the UW offensive coordinator. If you're, from the Seattle area, I'm sure that you know of Ryan Grubb. His scheme was a vertical, fairly pro-style scheme. I have heard a lot that he's probably going to not continue that. Mike Macdonald has mentioned that, it'll probably be a lot more run heavy than what they did at Washington. One interesting statistic that I found was the Seahawks and UW had the exact same pass percentage of the plays that they threw the ball on, which I thought was really interesting. I feel like everybody said, how is this going to translate? Because Seattle likes to run the ball. We did not run the ball. I think we were fourth highest in pass percentage at 61%. That is a lot of passing, and that is exactly what UW did. So I don't think it's going to be this how does Ryan Grubb fit with the Seahawks because they like to run the ball too much. Obviously, I would like to change, and we would like to, build through the ground game. And I think Ryan Grubb can do that. He said in his opening press conference that he feels confident implementing both sides of the ball, right? Both aspects of calling an offense, right? Both running the ball and passing. And I agree with him. I think he can do a good job. I think if you look at UW's run game, they didn't do it a lot, but I do think that they did it well. And that kind of like gap scheme from generally shotgun, I think that fits Charbonnet. I think that fits K9. I think that this is a really good hire. The Ryan Grubb hire is an upside play because he never really has called plays in the NFL. And that's always something you have to keep in mind. Like, yes, this has a lower floor potentially, but I really do think that Ryan Grubb brings a really high ceiling. And he could be, the perfect guy. I feel like everyone's like, oh, well, since we got Ryan Grubb, we're going to take Penix. I don't see that. Like, if a very rough pro comp for Michael Penix to me would be Geno Smith, right? This strong-armed guy who likes to win from the pocket and likes to throw the ball deep. Like, that is Geno Smith, right? Like, I honestly think that this is almost a commitment to Geno Smith. Or at least giving Geno Smith a chance to succeed and to have someone that's going to support him. I think that this is a really good hire. I don't think that this, says, oh, Penix is the pick at 16. I wouldn't totally be in favor of that. If it happens, I'm not going to be against it, but I think Penix has a lot of issues. I'll get more into those when we get into draft coverage, but I think that this is a great hire. I think it fits the scheme. I think it fits the personnel. I think what he was able to do with Rome Odunze, like, can we please emphasize DK Metcalf more than we have? That would be great, right? I feel like DK has been underutilized in Seattle, and I think Ryan Grubb has shown that he knows how to design an offense around his players' strengths with that breakout year that Rome Odunze had. So that's Ryan Grubb. Really excited about it. It is a high upside hire, and I think a pretty low floor hire. But I think the flip side of that is, like, let's say this Geno thing doesn't work, and in 2 years the Seahawks move on. Well, you can move on from Ryan Grubb, right? If you don't think Ryan Grubb is working, you can move on from him. That's not what I hope to happen, but I just think that is a possibility, right? The Seahawks are in an interesting position. You're probably not going to be like, I don't think their plan is to trade away Geno, draft a quarterback, and he's the starter. I don't think that's where they're going to go. And so I think having a high upside coordinator that, you can give him 2 years and then we can reevaluate. I'm really excited for this. Don't let my talking about, how the Seahawks, could get out of this. I really am excited about the Ryan Grubb hire. I think that this could be really good. College and the NFL are looking more and more the same as every year goes on. And I think taking, one of the best offensive coordinators from the college ranks and saying, okay, you're going to run a pretty similar system up in Seattle, that makes a ton of sense. So let's move on to the defensive coordinator, Aden Durde. I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce it. This is the Cowboys defensive line coach. He's been there for 2 years. I love this hire. When the Seahawks were talking about, interviewing these guys, I was kind of like, oh, well, it's because he's really the third ranked guy in the defensive, mind space for Seattle. I think that, Mike Macdonald is calling the plays. And then Leslie Frazier came in, and I think, he's been a defensive coordinator and a very successful defensive coordinator. We'll get to him later. So I think Leslie Frazier is going to have a pretty big role in how the Seahawks build and design their system. And so I was like, well, the defense coordinator hire doesn't matter that much. And, get a good guy that's going to be, help in the locker room and someone that provides a positional focus, right? Because Aden Durde focused on the defensive line. He says everyone calls him AD, so that's what I'm going to go with. AD really is an undefined role in Seattle, but I think he will be really good. He has done a lot in his career. He came through like he is British, and so his path to the NFL wasn't quite as, straight as many guys. Like it was, a pretty bendy path. But he got here. He has worked really hard. It sounds like he's really well spoken about. Everybody kind of loves this guy. And I really do think that he's going to bring, that defensive line focus, right? This is the guy that developed Micah Parsons. He came there the same year that Micah Parsons came there. And if you would have told me that Micah Parsons was going to be this outrageous, number one pass rusher, like some people legitimately thought he would just be a linebacker, like, a blitzing linebacker, right? The fact that you can take that and year one, he's one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. Some of the credit at least has to go to AD, and I think that he did a really good job. Dallas has always had, a good defensive line under AD, and I think that's going to continue in Seattle. I love that Mike Macdonald realizes that the Seahawks need to improve their defensive line, and I think that's what this hire does. And in his interview, I really do think that is the right man for the job. He is going to focus on, what this team needs and finding his role, and I think he realizes that. And I'm a lot more excited for what AD can do in Seattle than when I originally was right when they made the hire. So I think this is a really good hire. And so let's move on to Leslie Frazier, the assistant head coach. The Seahawks hired Leslie Frazier to be their assistant head coach, and I think that this is really when my excitement for this coaching staff went from a 9 out of 10, really optimistic to this is one of the better coaching staffs in the league, if not top 5. Getting Leslie Frazier, who has a proven track record of being a great defensive coordinator, getting him to be your assistant head coach, this is just a beautiful hire. This is probably the unexpected hire of this cycle, and I cannot, explain just how important I think that Leslie Frazier will be. He is the guy that can tell Mike Macdonald, all the ins and outs of being a head coach, and that's really important because this staff is so young, right? There's a lot of college guys, there's a lot of unproven guys, right? AD, he's, he hasn't spent a ton of time in the NFL. Honestly, I'm not going to do the math, but it's completely possible that Leslie Frazier has more NFL experience by himself than Mike Macdonald and his two coordinators. In fact, I would bet that is probably the case, right? He has so much NFL experience, and I think that he just does such a good job of being that, that experienced voice in the room, and that's what I keep coming back to with Leslie Frazier. He brings experience, and that is so important. You can have a young team, but you need to have somebody who's, been there to kind of provide some grounding. He built an elite defense in Buffalo, straight up. He built an elite defense. And yes, you can give some of the credit to Sean McDermott. And I think Sean McDermott proved that, he was definitely a piece of this by, playing so well this past season. But again, Leslie Frazier is not actually designing our defense, right? He is helping Mike Macdonald design the defense. He's helping AD design the defense. And there's nobody better that I would want to just be that experienced voice and help with, some of the aspects of, game planning and, designing roles. And being a head coach is so much, and especially trying to be a first-year head coach and trying to call plays, that's a lot. And I didn't really feel good about that until Leslie Frazier was announced as the assistant head coach. This is a really, really good hire. And I just want to say, Leslie Frazier is kind of the glue that I think will make all of this work. And so I'm so glad that he is in Seattle. And so let's move on to the special teams coach, Jay Harbaugh. This is probably the hire that I am the least excited about. I don't mean to say that I'm not excited about this hire. Yes. So Jay Harbaugh he is that Harbaugh. He is Jim Harbaugh's son. His family has a strong background in special teams, and he knows Mike Macdonald. And so I feel like this hire was not a punt, but just, it's just the special teams. Let's get somebody that Mike Macdonald knows he can trust, knows he can work with. And, he doesn't need to have the greatest resume because we're just looking for somebody that is going to work with Mike Macdonald and do a decent job at special teams. Special teams coordinator isn't, I don't mean to say it's unimportant, but it's not the most important role. And I think that, what is more important is that this guy will work with Mike Macdonald And so I think that's going to, I think it's all going to work out fine. I just don't know if he did an elite job at being the coordinator, and it's hard to separate, like, okay, what did Jim do and what did Jay do, right? So honestly, like, I don't think that his resume is quite as strong as these other guys. But at the end of the day, I don't really care. He's going to work with Mike Macdonald, and that's kind of all that matters. And I think he's going to do a decent job. And the Seahawks have, a really good special teams background, right? Just the baseline of your punter and your kicker take care of quite a bit of the special teams. And the fact that the Seahawks don't need to develop any of those guys makes me more optimistic. So yeah, this is a good hire. I'm not over the moon like I am with, pretty much all of these other hires, but I think Jay Harbaugh will do a pretty good job. The last guy I want to talk about is Scott Huff. And I think this is just emblematic of everything that the Seahawks are trying to do when building this coaching staff. Their offensive coordinator is an offensive line guy, and he specifically brought his offensive line guy from UW, right? And so, like that there, you are focusing on the offensive line. Mike Macdonald realizes that the Seahawks lost in the trenches last year. And so, same thing on the defensive line, right? You brought in a defensive line coach. And these are really important, and I think Scott Huff has done such an incredible job. UW had a really good offensive line last year, like a really good offensive line. Like, so good that I'm almost, that is like one of my knocks on Penix, is that he had such a good offensive line in front of him. And Scott Huff did that. That was what he did, right? Like, the Seahawks got the two guys that made the Huskies' offensive line so good, and I think that, getting both of these guys in the building is really a step and shows that the Seahawks really want to improve that offensive line. And I think that's exactly what Scott Huff is going to be able to do. He did an excellent job building this program, and they have a projected first-round pick this year in Troy Fautanu. I think that's how you pronounce that. Yeah, and so, like, the emphasis on offensive line is kind of what I want to focus on with hiring Scott Huff, because it was pretty clear that he was a pretty instrumental part of this hire, of the hire of Ryan Grubb, that, okay, Scott Huff is coming with you. Now we're in, right? And that's great. That this move shows me that Mike Macdonald understands what the Seahawks struggled with. And so I am really excited for Scott Huff to be in Seattle. Overall, this is a 10 out of 10 coaching staff. Like, this is phenomenal. I could not be more excited. I think that they properly addressed everything they needed to. And to me, this just shows the departure from the Pete Carroll era and his approach to coaches, honestly. And I think that, when Sean Desai left before last year, the Seahawks didn't replace him. They didn't even really make much of an attempt to say, okay, our defensive guru left, let's go find another one, right? They really just promoted from within and, kind of let that be, right? And that's not what is happening here anymore, right? This shows to me that John Schneider and Mike Macdonald understand that coaching is really important, and getting the right voices in the building is really important. And you can't just sit back and be like, well, we have, we'll develop some guys. Like, obviously that is what you want to happen, but like, you need to be aggressive. You need to be constantly exploring ways that you can bring in coaching talent, right? Coaching is talent, just like it is for players. And, you need to be, at the forefront of coaching to be a great team. Look at the previous Super Bowl, right? I would say that Andy Reid and Kyle Shanahan are probably two of the best head coaches and offensive play callers in the league. And so I don't think it's any wonder that they are the two guys that meet in the Super Bowl, because they're just such good coaches. I could not be more encouraged by all of these hires. I'm really excited to see what these guys can do in Seattle. And I hope you guys are too. Please let me know in the comments what you think of these guys. And thanks for watching.